Hey guys, it's the M3 here to talk about the Dahlia, the upcoming Fire Nihility character, who is speculated to be a break support, and more specifically how well she synergizes with my main, the king of break, Boothill. Before we get into the synergies, you might want to know a little bit about what she actually does. The dreams of what she does. For this section, I'm going to be calling her Lady D, just because she reminds me of an iconic historical figure from 2021. Like, they have a few design characteristics in common, including a clawed hand, which I think is pretty neat. So what does Lady D do? I think it's fitting to start with the unique defining feature of her kit, which is in her skill. Her skill is an amped up version of Ruame's skill. It's a blast attack that deploys a zone which increases your ally's weakness break efficiency by 50%. But also it allows you to deal super break damage without even breaking the enemy. As long as anyone on your team does toughness damage, you will deal super break damage. This also incentivizes break carries that deal lots of small hits of toughness, rather than characters that have a few large hits of toughness, because the super break scaling on her skill for enemies that aren't broken is higher than the super break scaling on her talent for enemies that are broken. Speaking of her talent, Lady D's talent does three distinct things. First thing it does is that it gives her 35 energy at the start of combat. Second thing she does is a little bit more complicated. She applies a status to herself called Dance Partner, which links her to another member of the team, specifically the ally that triggered the combat, or in other scenarios like the original Dance Partner dying. The Dance Partner effect is given to the ally with the highest break effect. Having the Dance Partner effect allows an ally to deal 60% scaling super break damage when an enemy is broken. This super break scaling when an enemy is broken is comparatively low when you look at Fugue and HMC. Fugue has a super break scaling of 100%, while HMC's super break scales from 120% to 160% depending on how many enemies there are. Also keep in mind that unlike HMC and Fugue, only the dance partners can super break once an enemy is broken. The third thing that Lady D's talent does is launch a follow-up attack after the dance partner launches an attack at an enemy. This can happen once per turn, similarly to how Fei Xiao's follow-up attacks are triggered. This follow-up attack has innate super break scaling as well, and is able to do a surprisingly high amount of toughness damage, dealing 5 instances of free toughness damage. Now onto her ultimate, which does a couple of things. Her ultimate is an AoE attack that inflicts all enemies with 18% defense down, regardless of effect hit rate, it just hits. It also applies the weaknesses of all dance partners. This means in a Boothill team, for example, Lady D's ultimate will apply both physical and fire weakness. The weakness implant and the defense down both last for 4 turns. This ultimate also has surprisingly high scaling, especially for a support. With a 300% multiplier, it has a higher scaling than both Himiko and the Herta's ultimates. But in reality, it's not going to be doing as much talent damage because there's not as many crit and attack buffs in break teams. Now onto her Ascension passive. Her second Ascension passive provides a large amount of break effect to all allies at the start of battle for 1 turn, equal to 24% of Lady D's break effect, plus an additional flat 50% break effect. And although this buff duration is short, you're able to refresh the buff for 3 turns if Lady D receives healing or a shield. This is a massive hit to sustainless teams, which break teams are often played as, due to the survivability provided by both Ruame and Fugue's action value delay. The break effect buff she provides from this talent is absolutely massive, ranging from 50% to over 120%. This is more than double the break effect value that Fugue provides, and more than 6 times the amount Ruame provides with her passive. Initially when I read this, I misread it as a passive triggering when there was any healing or shielding, and that would mean the Guard of Wuthering Snow set would have been a viable option in sustainless teams, but it has to specifically come from another teammate on your team. Here's hoping that things change over this beta. Her Ascension 4 passive provides 1 skill point every 2 times her follow-up from her talent is triggered. This is massive for break teams because almost every single break DPS either needs skill points or struggles to generate them in their downtime. Her Ascension 6 passive has 2 effects that are quite specific, one even more specific than the other since it only applies to 1 character. The first effect is that when a target applies a weakness to an enemy, their speed increases by 30% for 2 turns. Only a few characters can do this, including Boothill, Anaxa, Phynon, Firefly, Silverwolf, and, of course, Lady D herself. The second effect only occurs specifically when a fire character applies their own weakness. This effect allows fire characters to regenerate 10% of their max energy after applying a weakness. Finally, onto her eidolons. I'm only going to go over E1 and E2 because I'm a free-to-play player, so I don't want to talk out of my area of expertise. Her E1 is insanely strong, like on a different level. It does two main things. So the first thing it does is that it allows all allies to trigger super break damage when an enemy is broken, rather than her talent being limited to herself and her dance partner. However, her dance partner gets an additional 40% boost to the super break scaling when an enemy is broken. This is a reasonable quality of life and damage buff, but its second effect is even more powerful. Once per enemy target, the dance partner's break damage also deals an additional amount of flat toughness damage equal to 25% of an enemy's max toughness. So for example, if an enemy had 100 toughness, it will allow the dance partner to deal an additional 25 toughness damage on top of the toughness that they're already dealing the first time that they attack an enemy. This is particularly good for characters like Boothill, since his talent already has a built-in cap of 160 toughness damage. But since this is a flat toughness value, it's not considered towards this cap. Her E2 automatically applies the status from her ult, and this status additionally has the effect of decreasing enemies all type res by 18% for 3 turns. So just a quick summary, her talent links herself to an ally, allowing them to deal super break damage when an enemy is broken, as well as triggering a follow-up attack once per turn, generating 1 skill point every other turn. Her skill provides a zone which gives 50% weakness break efficiency and allows allies to deal super break damage without actually breaking the enemies. Her ultimate deals toughness damage to all enemies, as well as applying the weaknesses of herself, fire, and her linked ally. She's able to provide a large break effect buff when she receives sustain, so healing or shield, as well as providing a speed buff to allies that implant weaknesses, and generating energy specifically for fire characters that implant fire weakness. As you can see, the Dahlia's kit is absolutely stacked. So now it's time for the fun part. Let's analyse how well she works with Boothill. Should you pull the Dahlia for Boothill? The quick answer is yes, but the long answer is a lot more complicated than that. So let's actually break down how they synergize and where the pain points are. The biggest synergy between Boothill and the Dahlia is the fact that her skill provides 50% weakness break efficiency. This stacks with both Fugue's E1 and Realme's weakness break efficiency. This means that Boothill can deal a large amount of toughness damage to a single enemy. With Realme, Fugue and the Dahlia, Boothill's enhanced basic attack goes from dealing 50 toughness to 125 toughness, and his ult goes from dealing 30 toughness to 75. The Boothill is able to deal 200 toughness to a single target in a single turn. And consider the fact that his attack will be followed up with one Dahlia follow-up attack, which is able to deal 30 toughness in this scenario. It means that this sequence of attacks will deal 230 toughness to a single target, which is massive. Like, there's very few enemies that can actually handle that amount of toughness damage. And if we consider the Dahlia's E1, the upper bound for one ult, enhanced basic attack, follow-up attack rotation is just above 300 toughness, and that's a lot of toughness damage. Like, considering the fact that Hule is considered an enemy with high toughness and he only has 240. Just to clearly state again how strong this truly is, if her whole kit was just her skill and her E1, she would still be the best in slot 4th slot option for sustainless Boothill teams, just because of how much value is provided by the weakness break efficiency and the percentage based toughness damage. The second part of her skill, arguably the more unique part of her kit, which allows allies to deal super break damage without actually breaking the enemies, actually doesn't synergize that well with Boothill for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that Boothill's talent is where most of his damage comes from. Because his talent doesn't trigger super break, it means that he's missing out on a really good portion of his damage, which only triggers when an enemy is broken already. So he'll still be dealing decent damage because he's a physical character building break effect, but the additional damage that you actually get from building trick shots won't be as effective in this scenario because it doesn't trigger your re-break passive. The second reason this isn't as effective on Boothill compared to other breakers is that the mechanic favours breakers that hit frequently with smaller toughness damage. This is because they will be able to trigger this super break more often compared to Boothill, who's only going to be able to trigger it maybe 3 or 4 times on a high toughness enemy. Dahlia's ultimate synergizes with Boothill very well because it provides defensive shred and implants physical weakness as well. Boothill teams already have a lot of sources of defensive shred, so you can easily get to the higher numbers closer to 100. You get defense shred from his E1, his S1, Ruan-Mei E1, Fugue provides defensive shred, and you can run defensive shred light cones such as Cypher's light cone or Resolution Shines. And now Dahlia herself provides 18% defense shred. The weakness implant from this also allows Boothill to switch targets a lot more easier, since he doesn't have to use his ultimate to switch targets to an enemy that isn't physical weak. Dahlia's second passive is actually quite anti-synergistic with Boothill, since he prefers running teams without a sustain to maximise his buffs. But Dahlia requires sustain to trigger this passive and provide that break effect to her teammates. This is quite a substantial loss for Boothill's sustainless teams, but it is a significant buff for teams that you have to run a sustain in. Dahlia's Ascension 4, which recovers skill points after 2 follow-up attacks, actually is really useful on a Boothill team, because there are scenarios where he can be quite SP negative, such as when you run Fugue, you have to enter standoff every single time you want to break, or if another teammate breaks for you, you have to re-enter standoff again, which is another skill point used. As for Dahlia's Ascension 6 passive, Boothill is one of the few characters that can actually activate the passive and give himself that 30% speed bonus. And he doesn't really care too much about generating energy because of his innate energy mechanics, so it's not that big of a deal that he doesn't regenerate the max energy from the second part of the passive. The speed buff from the A6 passive is surprisingly strong for Boothill, since it drastically reduces his speed requirements, as well as acting as a massive buff to the Eagle set on Boothill. If you tally up the speed from his S1, the speed from Ruan-Mei, and the speed from Lady D's passive, you actually get 52% speed, which is huge. This allows Boothill to reach pseudo 200 speed with just 162 speed out of battle, since the action advances from Dance 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 and the Eagle set allow him to go 4 times in the first cycle of MOC. Before this was only possible by using a dedicated action advancer, or some really niche specific setups using 4-star Tingyun's E1. This passive trivializes speed tuning, as well as enabling new very powerful setups for Boothill. Now that we've spoken about their individual synergies, let's talk about teams. Like, what teams does Dahlia enable and which ones will she be a replacement for other characters? Dahlia is a part of both Boothill's new best in slot sustainless team and his best team with a sustain. His best in slot sustainless team is Boothill, Fugue E1, Ruan-Mei E1, and the Dahlia, preferably also at E1 to be honest. This team takes 2 supports that are already best in slot with Boothill and adds the third one who is also best in slot with him, to enable a new team with high super rate scaling and 150% weakness break efficiency. If you manage to get Dahlia E1, I think that this team is actually so broken that it fundamentally dismantles the weakness break mechanic, because there's so few enemies that can withstand that much toughness damage. So I assume that Hoyo is just going to make enemies with bigger and bigger toughness bars, because this team literally destroys any current enemy in the game as long as you don't have any issues with sustain. If you don't have Fugue's E1, then don't worry, Fugue at E0 will still be best in slot in this sustainless team. However, they become a bit more competitive with HMC, since HMC's personal damage from getting Dahlia's buff is actually competitive to the damage that you would gain from running Fugue. But in Boothill teams, the calculations are often misleading since they underestimate the power of Fugue's exo toughness against certain enemy scenarios. But what if you want to run a sustain, or you didn't pull for Fugue or Ruan-Mei? What do the teams look like? If you don't have Fugue's E1, then you usually want to run Ruan-Mei and Dahlia together, rather than Fugue E0 and Dahlia together, which other break DPS tend to prefer. This is because with Ruan-Mei and Dahlia together, you get team-wide 100% weakness break efficiency, which is really important for Boothill to do his job because he's such a breakpoint dependent character. Fugue will still be a good option at E0 since she allows you to build early trick shot quite quickly. If you have Fugue E1, it's preferable to run Fugue and Dahlia together instead of Dahlia and Ruan-Mei, since Fugue provides higher damage scaling as well as providing a higher damage buff to the rest of the team, allowing your break supports such as Lingsha and Gallagher to contribute significantly to the team's DPS. However, there's one caveat to this. If you're running a sustain that deals a lot of talent damage such as Hyacinth or DHPT, Ruan-Mei E1 will be preferable to Fugue E1, since she can provide meaningful buffs to your sustain, who's going to be dealing a decent amount of non-break damage. So just to wrap things up, if you play Boothill in teams with a sustain, then consider pulling Dahlia because it will be a significant increase to the whole team's output. If you play Boothill teams without a sustain and you've been looking for a really good 4th slot, provides a significant damage boost and a lot of utility, then consider pulling Dahlia. And if you're looking to fundamentally break the game and exploit the unique way that weakness break mechanics work with Boothill, then pull Dahlia E1. If you already have a high investment Boothill team and you're clearing quite comfortably and you want to save your pulls or you want to pull Cyrene now, I think just go for it. You can skip Dahlia and get her on her rerun. A lot of what Dahlia provides for Boothill, especially in sustainless teams, is mostly utility, such as speed, skill point generation, and weakness implant. So Boothill already has other teams without Dahlia that will be doing more damage, but overall they should still clear slower than a Dahlia team because of the utility she provides. And that's all, so I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I put a lot of effort into these videos. They don't get watched much, but I hope more people jump on them. And yeah, have a nice day. Bye.